Another question that agricultural producers must face is how much are they going to produce? Now that they kind of decided what are they going to produce, given their area, their climate, given the fact of how much risk they're willing to take, their distance to the market, and things of that nature, now they must decide how much are they going to produce. Well, again, the textbook answer to that question is very simple. We're going to produce where our marginal cost equals our marginal revenue or our price. That is the profit maximizing area, is when marginal revenue equals marginal cost, as we've talked about in Ag Econ 2 here at Casper College. But do we really know the price? Do we know the price of the agricultural good when we go to sell it? No, we don't. And that's because of this biological lag that we face in agriculture. With this biological lag, we must make production decisions before we ever know the price. We make production decisions based off of estimated prices, or these expected prices. So these expected prices are prices estimated months or years before the harvest or sale of that agricultural good, or a good in general. So whenever we go to produce something, we are basing how much we produce on these expected prices. So how much we produce is based off these expected prices, but do these expected prices really come to fruition whenever we go to sell the product? Oftentimes, no. We have these realized prices, or the price at harvest or sale. The realized prices are often very different from the expected prices. So that makes it very hard to accurately predict of how much are we going to produce this year. Because we're going to base how much we produce on these expected prices, but whenever it comes to actually selling that product, we realize that the prices were different. And these realized prices are different from the expected prices because of a couple to three key aspects. Because of the amount that's being sold, the size of crop, and then the demand. So because of demand changes, shifts in demand, we might see prices increase or decrease. Also the size of crop. And the size of crop might be different at the end of the year than what we expected it to be at the beginning. So let's give an example of that real quick. Let's say, for example, we have a corn market, and corn prices are relatively high. When they say, well, we expect that the size of the crop of corn is not going to be very high this year, so overall the prices are going to be relatively high. But then, let's say all the other farmers decide that they're going to produce corn this year as well. It drives prices down because of the supply of crop. The size of the crop is a lot larger than what you were expecting. Now prices are lower. So the expected prices whenever you made those production decisions were relatively high. But because of that biological lag and the fact that the size of the crop actually was a lot larger than what they originally expected, the realized prices are a lot lower. So that actually makes that optimal mix of crops very difficult to obtain. So then whenever we talk about size of crops, often the crop size can vary by plus or minus 10% within a year. And that might be depending on how good is the weather. Was there bad weather somewhere, maybe in the Corn Belt, that ruined up this large corn crop? Or was it phenomenal weather in the Corn Belt that caused corn supply to actually increase? Or was it some other factors such as pests? Or maybe they couldn't get the chemicals that they needed? Or something along the lines of maybe diesel prices rose to the point where it wasn't profitable to actually go out and spray that last application of a pesticide, causing their supply to fall. Or maybe diesel prices were low enough that you did spray that last application of pesticide, making your crops grow even more than what you were expecting. So size of crop can be dependent on weather and other factors. Another thing that often plays into the size of crop is, what is the farmer's mentality? So a farmer is going to look at the beginning of that harvest before they plant, and they're going to make this production decision based off of these expected prices. If the expected prices are very high, a farmer might plant a lot of corn. So other farmers' intentions, if all the farmers are facing the same dilemma of let's all produce a lot of corn because the prices are real high, or each individual farmer makes that individual micro decision, but on the macro sense, everybody planted a lot of corn. We produce a lot of corn in this particular year. These other farmers' intentions now led to an increase in size of that crop. Then we also face this inelasticity when it comes to crops. Oftentimes, whenever we're dealing with agricultural commodities, we face a very inelastic supply curve, And what that means is changes in price do not really affect, in a large sense, the amount of crops that we produce. Large changes in price have small changes in the quantity that we produce, meaning that even large or small price swings, we're going to produce relatively the same amount of crops from year to year. And that leads to this mixes. How much or what is the optimal mix that we are going to produce? If we produce too many of a particular type of crop, it's going to lead to low prices. Versus if we plant too little of a certain type of crop, it leads to high prices. So what are we going to do? Are we going to produce a lot of crops of this one particular type and it drives prices down, or produce less? And it makes it very hard, especially whenever we deal with these expected versus realized prices, to come up with the optimal mix for an agricultural environment. And then also another thing that makes it very difficult is it's often difficult to switch from one type of commodity to another. Sometimes it can be rather easy, whereas you might be able to switch from corn to soybeans to cotton with relative ease without too much more equipment. But it might be very difficult for some people to switch commodities, such as switching from a cattle operation to a hog operation. And it's when it's difficult to switch that commodity that leads into this inelasticity of supply, because now if prices fluctuate very heavily, let's say there's a large price change, then we're probably not going to switch from cattle to hogs because of that large price change, because of the infrastructure it takes to build up, say, that cattle operation. So when it's hard to switch commodities, it leads to that inelasticity of supply aspect that we find. And whenever we deal with commodities that are very hard to switch and interchange, we often find that those farmers or those ranchers might hold on to their same particular commodity, keep producing the same commodity year after year, and their major decision is going to be more of whether or not to expand or get out of that business altogether. They're going to take the good prices with the bad prices, and they're going to look to the future to say, are we going to continue to be profitable so much so that we need to expand our operation, or are we going to be actually losing money in the near or in the future so that we actually need to shut down our production? So whenever it's easy to switch commodities, you might not have near as much of that impact. But those commodities that's hard to switch, we might be looking to the future of saying, are we going to get out of this commodity altogether, or are we going to stay into it? And then another thing we must take into consideration, commodities versus differentiated products. Commodities are those homogeneous products that you can't tell a difference from one to the other. That often leads to people becoming price takers. Usually farmers are dealing with commodities. Then you also have these differentiated products. If you have a differentiated product, you can often dictate the price. And there are certain benefits of having this differentiated product, such as being able to control the supply and being able to control the price. But a good thing about having and operating a commodity is because you're operating in this perfectly competitive market, typically the amount that you produce is not going to affect the prices. So if you're operating in a commodity, you typically try to maximize your production in order to maximize your profits. Another deal that we must take into account when we're deciding how much are we going to produce is, are we going to produce crops or livestock? The thing with crops and livestock is crops and livestock are both highly specialized aspects. So we talked about this economies of scale right here, this economies of size. Because of the economies of size, these operations are becoming very large and they're specializing in either crops or livestock. And it becomes very difficult to switch from crops to livestock or back from livestock to crops. You might be able to switch within livestock or within crops, but you must make a decision from the get-go. Are you going to produce crops or livestock?